Hello, my name is Nihad Al Sharif. I'm a professional engineer and a senior IEEE member. Today, I have the pleasure to talk to you about codes and standards. But before I start, I would like to share my disclaimer with you. Although I'm honored to serve on different technical committees, including but not limited to the ones on the screen, I'm not talking on behalf of any of these organizations. What I'm going to share with you is my own opinion based on my experience and involvement with the electrical industry. My contact information is on the screen. Please feel free to reach out. Let's start. Module 2, Definitions. A standard is a document established by consensus and approved by a recognized body that provides for common and repeated use, rules, guidelines, or characteristics for activities or their results, aimed at the achievement of the optimum degree of order in a given context. In short, we can think of standards as the world's common language. It's our way to share our collective wisdom, past experiences, and best practices with future generations. Document name. So contrary to popular belief, a document name is very important because it will dictate the language used in the document and it will give you an idea of how to apply requirements in the document. So let me give you some examples here from IEEE. So on the left here, we have IEEE standard 802, number of document is 802. It's the IEEE standard for local and metropolitan area networks. In the middle, we have another IEEE standard, document number 1159, and the title is IEEE Recommended Practice for Monitoring Electric Power Quality. And to the right, we have another IEEE standard, number 1584, and it's IEEE Guide for Performing Arc Flash Hazard Calculations. So if you notice, we have three different standards, IEEE standards. The first one is called IEEE Standard. Second one is IEEE Recommended Practice. And then the third one is IEEE Guide. Let me throw something more into the mix. On the screen now, you can see the National Electric Safety Code. And it's another IEEE document that has code in the title. So what's the difference between the four documents? So let's start by some definitions. So first, a standard document could have different names, and hence I started by document names. So a standard document can be called a standard, a recommended practice, guide, code, and we just shared some examples. Collectively, all four documents are referred to as standards. So when I say standard, of course, I recommend it to be more specific, but when I say standard, I could be referring to a standard, recommended practice, guide, or code. So let's dig into what a standard is. So a standard is a document with mandatory requirements, and it's characterized by the use of the verb shall. So in the requirements would be, if you read the document, you shall do this, you shall do that, or you should not do this. You shall not do this. An example is document IEEE 802. A recommended practice is a document in which procedures and positions preferred by the developing organization, like IEEE, are presented and is characterized by the use of the verb should. So in the document, the requirement would read, you should do this, you should not do this. IEEE 1159 is an example. Guide is a document in which alternative approaches to good practices are suggested, but no clear-cut recommendations are made. And the language would be, or is characterized by the use of the verb may. Again, the requirements would read, you may do this, you may not do this. And you can see the language is getting softer in terms of the enforcement. We went from shall, should, to may. IEEE 1584 is an example. So a code, on the other hand, is the industry-based enforceable standard, which it's a standard, but you can think of it as the law. It is enforceable. And similar to standards, codes would include mandatory requirements and the language and the use of the verb shall. So you shall do this, you shall not do that. Code compliance is enforced by a local AHJ authority having jurisdiction. For example, an inspector enforcing the requirement in the code, which is a standard. A code violation could result in fines, operation, shutdown, or liability lawsuit. It's important to note that each country has its own codes, but sometimes the same code is adapted by different countries. So for example, a US code can be used in other countries, or a European code can be used in other countries, depending on adoption. Different countries, of course, have different countries, different provinces, states, and/or municipalities can adopt a modified version of their country's code. So I'm from Saskatchewan, province of Saskatchewan. There's the Canadian code, and the province of Saskatchewan has the right to adapt the Canadian code with some modifications or deviations. Here, the IEEE headquarters is New Jersey, so the state of New Jersey can adapt the National Electric Code in the US with some modifications that the state of New Jersey would accept. So if we think of examples other than IEEE, on the left here we have an NFPA 7E document, which is titled Standards for Electrical Safety in the Workplace. And to the right, the Canadian counterpart, CSA Z462, Workplace Electric Safety. Both documents have requirements on how to deal with electric hazards or hazards associated with electric energy at the workplace. Next, we have NFPA 70 and Canadian Electric Code Part 1. Both documents are codes. Again, they're standards adopted by the jurisdiction or are enforced. And both of them have requirements for how to safely install electrical equipment. Looking at the international scene, we have the equivalent of the NEC and the Canadian Electric Code, and this document is IEC 60364. And if you notice here on the screen, there's a different approach. So in North America, we have one book that has all the requirements, the Canadian Code or the National Electric Code in the US. In Europe or internationally, the IEC, they have different parts and different sections that are addressing installation requirements as well, but not as one full document. And this is an IEC 60364 is a standard because the IEC tries to harmonize requirements coming from different countries. And once a country adapts this standard, it becomes, with some deviation sometimes or modification, it becomes a country code. That's why the IEC document 60364 is a standard, not a code. Let's look at a different industry. So construction industry, for example. So on the screen here, you see the IBC, it's the International Building Code, International Fire Code, International Residential Code. These are industrial codes in the United States that are related to the construction industry. And in Canada, we have a similar thing. We have the Canadian Building Code, we have the National Fire Code, and so forth. So to understand codes and standards, it's very important to understand the development process to be able to get involved in the development of a code or a standard of your interest. So I want to make sure that it's clear that each organization has a different process. The general idea or the general process, there's a lot of similarities, which we'll be going to be covering the general idea. But please be advised that before you get involved in a specific standard, you need to learn the process, the development process by the organization that you'll be getting involved with. To do this, I'm going to be using the 5W approach. So if you haven't heard of the 5W approach, I think it's a very good way to address or explain any topic. You just try to answer the 5 questions, the 5W questions: who, what, where, when, why, in whatever order that works for you. And there's an extension to the 5W approach. It's called 5W1H, and simply we're adding how to the mix. So what we're going to be discussing is why standards are developed, what drives the development of standards, where and how standards are developed, who developed standards, and finally, when standards are developed. Some key points of this video before we conclude. Standards are the world's common language. Standards are our way to share collective wisdom, past experiences, and best practices with future generations. Again, depending on the language used and enforceability, a standard document could be called code, recommended practice, guide. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.